This video will focus on strategies to effectively campaign against S373 in face-to-face discussions with your senators and their staff. Please remember to be polite in those interactions. In order to help you further, you can find the content of this video in a Microsoft Word format on my website, www.deviantconstrictors.com. On the left of the screen, point to Anti-Reptile Legislation, ARL, and then click on Face-to-Face Strategies. You'll also see two FAQs you can use to educate yourself and others about this bill. Finally, please visit www.kill-s373.com for the current strategy promoted by US ARC aimed at stopping this bill in the Senate and act on it immediately. The deadline for this is January 12th. Those letters need to be in the hands of Tom Wolf by January 12th. So let's begin by saying that every U.S. citizen would very likely support a well-thought-out initiative to remove Burmese pythons from the Everglades National Park, or the ENP. Now, on to the issue of S373. A scientific review is currently being conducted by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to determine whether Burmese pythons pose any credible threat to the ecosystem in South Florida and therefore warrant a restriction on the species. H.R. 2811 and S373 seek to circumvent the scientific process and establish legal restrictions immediately. This agenda is entirely promoted by radical animal rights groups like the HSUS, who are determined to end the reptile industry. This agenda is being forced down the throat of Congress and, as a result, the entire nation. So, we as reptile keepers need to know, what argument can possibly be made to circumvent this process that's been in existence for 110 years and regulate these animals immediately? It's never been done before. Argument number one. We're worried about the attacks on people in the Everglades National Park by Burmese pythons and then the resulting backlash in lost tourism dollars for the state of Florida. This is the safety argument. The proponents of this bill estimate that there are 150,000 Burmese pythons in the ENP. The ENP encompasses 1.5 million acres of land. So after doing some math, you would find out that there are approximately 10 Burmese pythons per acre. By this estimate, Burmese pythons are extremely prolific. If the ENP had only one visitor per year and they arrived in only one day, the chance of that person being in close proximity to a Burmese python on that particular day is pretty good. Approximately 10 million people have visited the Everglades in the last decade, not just one. So as a result, the chance of any of those 10 million people visiting the ENP being in close proximity to a Burmese python is astronomically high. But there's never been a single incident in which someone was attacked by a Burmese python in the ENP, despite the astronomical odds of a person being near one. Burmese pythons are not prone to attacking people. In fact, they're just like every other snake. Their wild instincts are to flee from people. So the logical conclusion is that there is no threat of attack by a Burmese python on visitors to the ENP, and as a result, no threat to tourism dollars. So argument number two, we need to remove Burmese pythons from the Everglades. They're not native to the area. Well, I agree, but there's no provision within Section 42A1 of Title 18 of the U.S. Code which states or implies any solution for removing these animals. So the logical conclusion is that S373 does not accomplish this goal. Argument number three. The USGS report alerted us to the possible spread of Burmese pythons across the nation. The ecological damage they could cause could be catastrophic. The USGS report made by RADA asserted that these animals could survive in other areas of the U.S. in the event of global warming in the year 2100, which is 90 years from now. So the logical conclusion here is that this threat is not imminent and action is not necessary immediately. Argument 4. Irresponsible owners release their pets into the wild, and we wish to discourage that. I wish to discourage that as well. However, there's no provision within Section 42A1 of Title 18 of the U.S. Code which states or implies any penalty for releasing a non-native animal into the wild. The logical conclusion is that S373 does not accomplish this goal either. So argument number 5. Irresponsible owners release their pets into the wild. That's a danger to the rest of the U.S. Well, we've already established that Burmese pythons do not attack people, so that's not a concern. This must be an ecological concern for the rest of the U.S., right? Well, irresponsible pet owners are not limited to extreme South Florida. They must exist everywhere, right? So Burmese pythons must have had equal opportunity to colonize every area of the United States. But despite equal opportunity to colonize the entire U.S., there are no other wild populations. Therefore, limiting factors, maybe such as climate and suitable habitat, have precluded the establishment of Burmese pythons in places other than extreme South Florida. Well, if climate and habitat are conducive to their survival, that means there's no threat to other areas of Florida, much less the rest of the country, to be colonized by these non-native pythons. So the logical conclusion here is that there's no risk to the rest of the U.S. from released Burmese pythons. They just can't survive. So argument number 6. Burmese pythons represent a threat to the ecosystem of the Everglades National Park. Burmese pythons cause no harm to the water, soil, or vegetation in their environment. Burmese pythons are carnivores and therefore do represent some danger to the abundant native wildlife in the Everglades, as well as the non-native feral cat and non-native nutria, both of which represent a much larger threat to the ecosystem in the ENP. The logical conclusion here is that Burmese pythons do represent a minor threat to the animals living in the ENP. However, that's a state issue, not a federal issue, and H.R. 2811 and S373 are federal bills. The logical conclusion reached here is that S373 and H.R. 2811 are unnecessary, and that Burmese pythons in the Everglades remain a state of Florida issue. So now that we know that there's no argument in support of this bill, let's look at one of the many arguments against it. A factor to be considered is the impact on the economy and the tens of thousands of families that would be financially crippled by this unnecessary legislation. Sometimes situations are best explained using analogies. Here are 2 that you can share with your senators and their staff to help them understand our plight. Analogy number 1. Let's imagine another industry dependent upon movement across state lines. This time we're not moving animals, we're talking about moving people. So what we're talking about here is tourism. More specifically, let's look at the theme parks in Central Florida. Imagine if only Florida residents could visit them and it was illegal for other residents of other states to cross state lines to visit these theme parks in Florida. Imagine that the penalty for violating that law is punishment by up to a $20,000 fine and 5 years in prison for each state line crossed to get to Florida. So what effect would that have on the tourism industry in Florida? Would it only be the theme parks affected? Or would hotels, rental car companies, airlines, restaurants, travel agents, gas stations, outlet malls, Kennedy Space Center, the beaches, and more be affected and possibly crippled? I think we all know the answer to that. The effect of such a law would devastate the economy in Florida and bankrupt affiliate businesses and industries. Another analogy. Let's imagine the stock market was in the same boat as the 9 types of pet snakes covered by S373. Imagine if it were illegal to sell stocks across state lines, or to move to a different state as the owner of a stock being held in your current home state. The very obvious impact of a bill like that would immediately collapse the stock market, and the entire world economy would be rendered obsolete overnight. Anarchy would ensue. Now obviously, both of these analogies are of a much larger scale than the reptile industry. However, reptiles represent a $3 billion per year industry, the decimation of which would not go unnoticed. Support of these bills will cripple or bankrupt the tens of thousands of U.S. citizens who have invested in this industry and the ancillary industries like dry goods, cage manufacturing, state-to-state shipping companies, food suppliers, etc. In conclusion, the lack of common sense justification as well as the negative financial impact of these bills should lead any person to the logical conclusion that S373 should not be supported. Please gain your senator's support to kill S373. Thank you.